Welcome back to part 2 of lesson 27 on shoulder theory. In the previous part, we covered anatomy, seam position, and seam design. This part is fully devoted to a closer examination on the industry standard for making shoulders. You see, most tailors around the world are taught pretty much the opposite of what I covered with you in part 1 on anatomy. To be more specific, instead of stretching out the back neck and the back shoulder, most tailors are taught to prevent the back neck from stretching out and to create a gather on the back shoulder. In common terms, this is referred to as putting fullness in the back shoulder. While this is an industry standard, there is a problem. The surface shape that gathers create are domes. Shoulders are saddles. The shapes don't match. So you might think, why do tailors do it? To answer this question, you first must know what this method looks like in practice. So let's first have a look at how a gather is created on a back shoulder and then answer the question of why tailors do it. So this is how it works. Here we have a front panel right side up. Then on top of that, we put the back panel right side to right side, and as you can see, the back neck is reinforced with a straight tape to prevent it from stretching out. Now, the shoulder seams are joined together on the edge, and so are the necklines. Then we will start basting our seam, and as you can see, the back shoulder is longer than the front shoulder. So this will be brought over here as we are gathering the back shoulder onto the front shoulder. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Usually the gather that's created is in the 2/3 area of the shoulder from neck point towards the shoulder, and the last part is kept flat. Once the baste is done, the gather is compressed with the iron. Now, as you can see, the gather has somewhat created a concave line from our straight line because all the excess material has been pushed as a bubble right behind the back shoulder. So whenever we're done, we press the seams open, and as I said, the fullness has created a small dome-like bubble right behind the back shoulder. And when you're done, you can hold it in your hands and you can look at it and say, well, that looks pretty good, doesn't it? Yeah, no. Let's go through the reasons one by one for why tailors think there should be a gather on the back shoulder. So here we have our mannequin, and on the shoulders of our mannequin we have a very basic 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch shoulder pad. Nothing special, just a little bit of elevation. On either side of our mannequin we have a back panel. The left hand side has been stretched along the back neck and the back shoulder, and the right hand side is made up according to the industry standard. As you can see, we have a reinforcing tape that prevents the back neck from stretching out, and we have a gather of 1/4 of an inch. Normally the gather is done between 1/2 inch to 3/4, that's 1.2 centimeters to 2 centimeters, but I've done a little bit less because otherwise the effect would be very exaggerated. Now, you as a tailor may look at the back, see a trapezius muscle and think that's round, that requires fullness to fit the cloth nice and smoothly over it. However, when you go ahead and put some fullness in the back shoulder, what you'll notice is a big bubble. Now, that bubble is not really fitting nicely over the saddle shape that the shoulder naturally has. So what will happen is that the cloth is not really resting on the body. You might think, hey, I've done this before and I never had a bubble like that. Could be true. What will happen is that your front panel will slightly pull the back panel because of the weight that it has and distribute that one big bubble into multiple small bubbles. Depending on the cloth that you're working on, these may or may not be visible. The point is, you have a bubble there that has no business of being there. Therefore, if you think that the fullness in the back shoulder accommodates for the trapezius, think again. It doesn't really do that. Now, I can understand that you look at this bubble and think, that would be really good if you're fitting a bodybuilder. Then again, unlikely. Why? The trapezius muscle is mainly developed at the back of the neck and the sides of the neck towards the back, not in the middle of the shoulder. Also, technicalities aside, would you really want to make a shoulder line that accentuates a lump on there, or would you rather use your skills to provide your client, who may be a bodybuilder, with a very elegant and smooth shoulder line? Now, let's do a comparison. As you can see, the cloth just lays naturally over the shoulder and around the neck, whereas on this side, there is a bubble that cannot be flattened because the material is gathered and therefore the surface shape has changed in the wrong direction. There is one occasion where we can have fullness in the back shoulder, which is a very rare occasion. You could work on a costume or an old-fashioned jacket where the shoulder seam is literally resting on the back of the individual. That positions the shoulder seam right on the trapezius. In a situation like that, you may, although I don't recommend, get away with some fullness in the back shoulder. But you have to keep in mind that your back shoulder is either going to go to the center back or your back neck is going to be very, very small. No standard modern jacket has their back neck that small or their shoulder seam that far back. They are all either in the middle of the neck or just a little bit further back, but not all the way to the center back. So the claim that fullness in the back shoulder helps to fit the trapezius muscle is technically wrong. Here we are again with our mannequin. Nothing has changed apart from the left back panel. You might think, while you're putting fullness in the back shoulders, that these vertical waves are taken up by the forwards movements of your arms and thereby provide more comfort. Wrong. Why? As we already established, the fullness in the back shoulder is compressed into a smooth bubble parallel to the gathered line. There will be no vertical waves. In fact, the majority of pulling with your forwards arm movement happens at the cross back. That is at the top of your side seam, not in the shoulder area. If anything, whenever you have a bubble in the back shoulder and you move your arms forwards, you may turn that bubble into an ugly pleat that is visible from the front. So, if you want to provide more room for movement, let out the top of the side seam and don't mess around with the fullness in the back shoulder. You might take a back panel and clear it against the back of your mannequin or the person you're trying to fit. As you're clearing the fabric over the shoulders and the rest of the back, you will see some surplus at the back side area. This of course happens due to the roundness of the back or the prominence of the blades. There are two ways to deal with this surplus if you want to get rid of it. The first way is to remove it as a dart, which wouldn't be aesthetically sophisticated. The second way is to gather that surplus to create a bubble parallel to the gathered line, which will fit over the blades once the wearer is moving into the garment. As you can see, on the left-hand side, we have a back panel that is stretched along the back neck and the shoulders, and the surplus around the back side has been gathered to create that volume. Now, sometimes, depending on the cloth that you're using, you will be limited in how much you can gather and compress. So, a solution that tailors have come up with, inspired by the basic slash and spread dart transfers, is to take this surplus and to move it all the way to the back shoulder, like so, and then gather all of that surplus right there. Now, we have already covered why it is definitely not a good idea to put any fullness in the back shoulder. I have to say that you could remove this surplus in the shoulder area if you're actually using a dart, because a dart removes material and still allows you to have a smooth back shoulder without any bubbles on top. However, it is wrong to think that a gather would do the same, at least not in the shoulder area. All you're doing is moving the problem from one area to another. Not a good idea. One of the things that tailors often do once they have sewn the shoulders with fullness in the back shoulders is to hold it in their hands like this, as if this mimics the shoulders, and then say, look, can you see how the fullness in the back shoulder makes the shoulder curve forwards? What you have to understand, my friend, is that this effect is nothing more than an optical illusion. It is not real, it does not exist. Let me tell you why. First of all, the hands in no way resemble the shoulders. Second of all, the reason why you are seeing a forwards effect like this is because you're holding it on your hands, which is very narrow, and the bubble that you have there as a consequence of your fullness, which is compressed, has nowhere else to go but forwards. However, as soon as this garment goes over a real shoulder, with or without pad, the seam straightens and the bubble appears right at the back of the shoulder. What does create a forward shoulder effect is the combination of two things. The first one is a wider cross back than a cross chest, which angles the armhole slightly forwards, as you can already see. The second thing is the length that you create on your front shoulder with the insertion of a wedge on your canvas, for example, or the stretching out of your front shoulder and front thigh. It's the combination of those two that creates a forward shoulder effect, not the gather in the back shoulder. Now that we've gone through all the different flaws that I demonstrated for the technique of gathering the back shoulder onto the front shoulder, you may have a question. Why on earth do all these tailors all around the world use this technique if it has so many flaws? Well, to understand this and to answer this question, we have to consider a few factors. Some of them are direct, some of them are indirect. The direct ones are really things that we can change now, and we can have massive impacts with the changes and the improvements that we bring to them. These ones are a bit more sneaky. You know, everyone is affected by these at multiple levels in society and jobs and things like that. So we'll try to make it specific to tailoring. Let's begin. We have workshop culture leads to lack of encouragement, leads to poor references. What do I mean by that? Starting with workshop culture. You have to understand that the majority of tailors throughout time have learned this craft and developed it in workshops. A tailoring workshop has only one purpose: to produce. Obviously, it's not a school, it's not an academy, it's not somewhere where you just do your Sunday hobby or whatever. Everyone is there with the purpose to have maximum output. When you're there as a young apprentice, and you have to imagine, 17th century going all the way back to time, but also 1950s, 60s, and 70s. When you're there as a young apprentice, the last thing that the workers there want is this young kid jumping around, asking questions, not only asking questions about things to hypothesize and to fantasize about, but also question the things that are done in the workshop. It's just not accepted. So you are not encouraged to live in your fantasy and to explore new possibilities, okay? The idea is, this is the information we have, we're going to exploit it as much as we can so that we can have maximum output. That, obviously, is lack of encouragement for you to discover new things. When you grow older in a workshop like that, you take that on as well, and you pass it on to the next person, the next person, the next, and so that spirals in a very negative loop. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that, obviously there are many problems. One of the most important problems is it doesn't allow the craft to flourish. When I teach you things about relative layer length or positive surface curves and negative surface curves, I'm giving you tools to look at the world around you, recognize shape, take it on, translate it, and play with it. If you don't have those perspectives, those lenses, which are essentially references for you as an artist or an artisan, you're going to look at everything as a round shape, and everything that's round requires fullness. That's not how things work. It's literally the same as if the hammer is your only tool, then every problem is a nail, It's similar to that. Now, it's very important for us to be aware of this, because if you're a business owner or you're learning tailoring and you're going to set up a workshop, you need to have the right culture, and not just the right culture for you to bring your business into prosperity, but also the right culture that allows the craft to develop, okay? We can't be stuck in time. Then we have indirect causes, okay? So we have conformity, authority, simplicity, risk, and style versus technique. Obviously, whatever job you have, you could be affected by these, but let's talk about tailoring. Conformity. Imagine you're in a workshop. 10 people are doing shoulders the same way. You are taught to do the shoulders the same way. And you think in your mind, I'm not sure if this is a good technique. What is the chance of you risking being fired, kicked out, or even abused verbally? What is the chance for you to stick your head out and be like, yeah, guys, I know you've been doing this for 70 years, but I really think this is wrong. We have to change our methods. Not only are they going to laugh at you, but you're going to be kicked out as well. So it's easier and safer for you to conform than to challenge the status quo, okay? Then there is authority. Now, authority has two aspects. First of all, if you have not developed independent thinking, which is related to your, not only the way your intellect works and how you process things, but also the courage you've developed to think independently, someone else is always going to think for you. So if you're in a challenge with someone in a workshop and you want to question the method that they're using, if you're not prepared mentally and with the right knowledge, they could easily say, hey, I've got most of the knowledge, I've got most of the experiences, this is how it's done, because I say so, now go back to your workstation and do as I say. You can't think for yourself in that sense. But there is another thing. When you are a novice and you have no information, and the first expert crosses your path, what they say will stay with you the longest. The first things you are taught will be in your DNA, and it's very unlikely for you to go after 10 years back in time and reconfigure everything that you've been taught, unless it's so bad fundamentally that you have to, revolutionize the way you are producing in that time. Then we have simplicity. Obviously, if we have one method of putting shoulders together for all styles and all figures, well, that's a lot simpler to compute than a dozen conditional ones. As a workshop that is mainly concerned with production and maximizing output, obviously what you want is the most simple technique, because the most simple technique also reduces risk. I talked to you about the workmanship of certainty and the workmanship of risk. When you are making shoulders, let's say in our case, and the final outcome depends on your skill to manipulate the cloth and to stretch, know exactly how much to do it, in which area, which direction, and your experience and judgment, it's not really beneficial for a workshop to operate on that. Because imagine you have a workshop with, especially old workshops, with hundreds of workers. What you want are simple and risk-free methods. You can't walk around and manage every single person and look at how they're stretching shoulders, whether that's enough, that's nice, that's not nice. So it's not really, efficient way of managing at least risk. Then we have style versus technique. Extremely important. Most of you are going to be affected by this. When you go to a workshop that has a house style, let's say, and they teach you how to make a jacket in that house style, you're going to confuse the techniques of that style with the universal techniques to make all jackets. You get me? So what you'll end up thinking is that, the way to make shoulders is what I've been taught in that workshops, whereas what they taught you was how to get those shoulders with this technique, okay? So style and technique have a blurry line, and there is always this tension between them. Those are the factors that we are really dealing with. Now, some of them amplify one another, some of them are sometimes more important, but it's up to you to think, observe, and see which ones are affecting you. And if you are affected by one of them, see what the solutions are for you to overcome them. That's all. This is the end of part 2. In the next part, part 3, we're going to go through the fundamentals of the Pagoda shoulder. I'm going to show you what the principles are in building the pads, how to draft one, and of course, the making of it. See you there. In worst case scenarios, backwards. And although there seems to be